Well, it's Uncommon Fossil. They continue with the series looking at the rules of the Pokemon TCG trading card game, and today taking a look at what resets Pokemon abilities and resets the effects of attacks. What we're going to do is take a look at a couple questions that relate to this that I want to make sure we answer. Going to take a look at the rules and some rulings just to see what the answers are there, and then going to take a look at some examples to make sure we understand what it all means. The examples are kind of to put all of the rulings together. So first, a couple questions. First question comes from the Pokemon TCG forums. And here's the question: if I use Concealed Card's ability with Greninja and then Professor Turo Greninja and put him back on my bench, can I use Concealed Card's ability again? So ability like Radiant Greninja's, you can only use once per turn, but if you scoop it up with Professor Turo's scenario, replay it, can I reuse that ability? So a very good thing to know. We'll be getting to that answer as we move on. Another question, this came from a comment in an earlier video introducing the series, so glad to get the feedback, and that's partly why I want to prioritize this question in this video. And the question here is related, but also brings up some new issues. Something that always confused me was stuff like Buzzwole GX and Zacian V can attack again if they just switch in and out of the active spot, but stuff like Jirachi's Stellar Wish doesn't get reset from switching in and out of the active, but it does get reset by Scoop Up Net. So Buzzwole GX, Zacian V, they're slightly older cards. With the examples, I'll look at cards that are in standard format right now, but they have attacks that say you can't use it again the following turn. But you might want to reset it to attack back-to-back turns. So there's one thing that does that, but then there's something more. But then resetting abilities, it works by slightly different rules. So want to understand the difference between resetting effects of attacks and resetting abilities, right? So those are two things we want to take a look at. So first, we turn to the rulebook. That's the best place to get our answers, and the rulebook addresses some of it, but not everything. So first, from the rulebook, we're going to look at two sections of that. One here, when your active Pokemon goes to your bench, whether it retreated or got there some other way. Some things do go away, special conditions, and any effects from attacks. So effects from attacks get reset when an active Pokemon goes to the bench. So that's very clear there. And it's, again, addressing effects of attacks. In another part of the rulebook, it says any effects of attacks or special conditions affecting the Pokemon, such as asleep, confused, or poisoned, and when it evolves. So effects of attacks go away through moving to the bench or evolving the Pokemon, because in essence, when you evolve the Pokemon, it becomes a new Pokemon. So the effect of the attack no longer applies to that Pokemon. Now, there are things that these rules don't address, and therefore I'm turning to PokeGym. It's a website that has a rules compendium. It's not run by the Pokemon Company, but what they do is they take the official answers to questions and official rulings from the Pokemon Company, and they make them online, publicly available. So while PokeGym's not official in of itself, they are citing the official answers, and they will reference in their answer where they got it from. I'm not including that here, but PokeGym's a great resource. I encourage you to find the website and check it out. So, and they do it in a question and answer format. People submit questions to Pokemon, and then there is the official answer. So here we go. Question: does benching always reset the Pokemon completely? That means moving from the bench, from the active spot to the bench is what that means. It's benching always reset attack effects. So only addressing attack effects, not abilities here, but benching resets that, which is consistent with what we read in the rulebook. So nothing particularly new there. But then they go on in another question and answer to give us to talk about abilities in particular, and actually the ability in Radiant Greninja we want to know about too. So that's even better. If my Radiant Greninja has already used its concealed card's ability during my turn, but then goes out of play, if I bring it back into play, can I use concealed cards again on the same turn? And the answer there is yes, you can. So we have an answer to the very first question on the forum already, but we'll just take a look at what that means more generally, right? Because we still need to know that. But when we use something to get it out of play, it leaves play completely. It means it's not in the active spot. It's not on the bench either. It generally goes into the hand. It could go into the bench or into the deck too. That doesn't matter, but it leaves the play state, and then the ability, which is restricted to once per turn, is reset because it becomes, in essence, a new card when it's played down again. So We'll take a look at some examples to make sure we clarify this and flesh this out. But basically, effects of attacks reset when the Pokemon moves to the bench, when the Pokemon evolves, or if the Pokemon leaves play, it also resets that. It never said it anywhere in these answers, but that is true as well. Abilities that have once per turn restriction on a card reset. They don't reset when it moves from the active to the bench or from the bench to the active. That doesn't do it. But if the Pokemon leaves play and then goes back into play, it does reset it. So effects of attack, we'll look at that first because this resets in more ways. So Miraidon EX is in standard format now. It's got the Photon Blaster attack. It does 220 damage, but then the text connected with that attack says during the next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. But if you move it to the bench by retreating or, say, using Switch Cart and then swing it back to the active again, like you play 2 Switch Carts, you now can attack again the following turn. The effect of its attack the previous turn that it couldn't attack has been reset. Once it goes to the bench, of course, you have to get it back to the active to actually attack with it. But double switching, you can then stream your Miraidon EX attacks. And then the other way to reset attacks is to get it out of play, right? Miraidon EX, once during your turn. Again, it can't attack the following turn, but if you use Professor Tura's scenario to scoop it up out of play, you could play that very Miraidon back onto the bench. You'd have to reattach the 3 energies, get it back into the active, but you can attack again. So that's a way to do it as well. The other thing that resets attacks that resets the effects of attacks we mentioned is evolving. So for instance, if our opponent attacked our Arceus V utilizing the Mawile's Tempting Trap attack, it says during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't return, and it also takes 90 more damage from attacks. So that's not great. We had an Arceus V, it's stuck in the active. One thing we could do, we could simply evolve the Arceus V into the Arceus V-Star. It essentially becomes a new Pokemon. Arceus V-Star is different than Arceus V, so the effect of Tempting Trap go away. We can now retreat the Pokemon if we want to, or even if we want to leave the Pokemon in the active spot because we want to attack with it, for instance, the effect of the attack that it would take 90 more damage on your opponent's next turn, that goes away as well. So evolving removes effects of attacks as well. Also, another way that we need to consider effects of attacks, so far we've talked about how our opponents are the effects of attacks on our turn, but we can also reset effects of attacks that might be there for our opponent. Let's say our opponent is playing a Alolan Vulpix V-Star. It used the Snow Mirage attack. It did 160 damage to us, but then also there's an effect of the attack that during your opponent's next turn, which in this case is us, assuming our opponent attacked into us, it prevents all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from Pokemon that have an ability. If we're playing a deck like Charizard EX, Pidgeot EX, all our Pokemon essentially have abilities. We're in trouble. We can't do damage to Alolan Vulpix V-Star, but we can now take advantage of the switching thing. If we move the Alolan Vulpix V-Star to the bench, let's say we play Prime Catcher or Counter Catcher, something like that, gust it to the bench, then we play Boss's Orders, pull it back into the active. There, my opponent's Pokemon switch to the bench in the active, so it's reset the effect of the attack on my opponent's Pokemon. So that applies as well, so that's important to know. So now I could take my Charizard EX, which has an ability, and the effect of Snow Mirage is gone because it switched in and out of the active. I could then hit into it for damage, or even if I can do enough damage, I can knock it out, which is what I certainly would like to see happen. So we reset effects of attacks for us or for our opponent these ways by switching in and out our opponent, our Pokemon or our opponent's Pokemon, and of course we can evolve our Pokemon to reset that. Abilities are more difficult to reset. Switching it out does not do it, and the reason for that, I think, is these abilities would be too powerful if we could. But say an ability such as Radiant Greninja's Concealed Cards, which we already know what it does, right? Discard an energy, draw 2 cards. It says once per turn that you can do that, so it's that once per turn thing. But if we get the Radiant Greninja out of play, we play Professor Tura's Scenario. I believe that was what the one question said. It goes into our hand. We use the ability, Professor Tura's Scenario into our hand. We can play it back down and reuse the ability, so that's very nice there. And also, getting a Pokemon out of play does reset effects of attacks as well. So we keep that in mind as well. But so I think that's pretty straightforward with abilities. The abilities are harder to reset. You have to get the Pokemon out of play. Just switching between active and bench does not do that. So I think some very helpful knowledge there and something that we can apply to a lot of our games. And so just knowing the rules helps us play the game, helps us make decisions, right? Because yes, in live, the game should automate it properly, although we also know it doesn't always do that. But even if you know it's 100% correct, you want to make the right decisions in the first place. The only way to do that is to know the rules of the game. So hopefully this is helpful. And if you have any other questions on this rule, on the rules regarding this, let me know in the comments below. Any future things you want to take a look at, please do let me know in the comments. Anyway, take care, have fun, and play some Pokemon TCG.